What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Week 17 top waiver wire targets at every single position. This should be the final week of your fantasy football season, the fantasy football championship, so there's no more looking long term. These are just going to be players who may be able to fill in, give you a spot start, whether it's at the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end position, or potentially a defensive streaming option. So we're not going to have a ton of guys at each spot. Pretty much just the players I think could, be guys you slot in there. These are going to be players or teams that are rostered in 40% or fewer leagues using the ESPN waiver wire. Like I've been doing over the last couple of weeks, I will have the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end start sits, and then rankings for all those positions plus the defenses. If you guys enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But let's dive right into the running back position. And there's honestly only one running back here that's rostered in 40% or fewer leagues that I think could even be playable heading into week 17. Obviously, there could be an injury here with the Monday games, 3 Monday games, so potentially a handcuff option could open up. But at this point, the only guy who I think could be playable is Chris Rodriguez. He's rostered in only 2.7% of leagues, but we've seen Brian Robinson miss multiple weeks here. He led the Commanders' backfield with 10 carries, turned that into 58 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, was targeted twice, caught one of those for 7 yards. It definitely seemed like when Brian Robinson was going to miss some time that Antonio Gibson was going to step into this really, really nice role. That's definitely not what's happened. It's clear at this point the Commanders, they're not huge on Antonio Gibson. They do not want him to carry a significant workload. I think Chris Rodriguez is likely going to be the better option if B-Rob misses another game, and is someone who you could end up plugging into your lineup, whether you have injuries or, just rough at the running back position. He could potentially slot in there somewhere in your lineup. So he's going to be the only running back. Now, pivoting over to the wide receiver position, I do think there are some more interesting options here, and I want to start it off with Demarcus Robinson, rostered in only 2.3% of leagues. But we have seen over the last few weeks, the Rams have shifted to running 3 wide receiver sets on a very large percentage of their snaps, and Demarcus Robinson is that locked-in wide receiver 3 for them. You have Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Demarcus Robinson. He's had at least an 86% snap share in each of the past 3 games. He's been 90+% in the last 2. He has scored 13 or more PPR points in each of his last 4 games, and he's coming off his best performance of the season on Thursday night. 6 receptions for 82 yards and a touchdown. He scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. Now, is that super sustainable? I don't know, but at this point, he's definitely riding the hot hand and is someone who could slot in as like a wide receiver 3 flex option with his current role and just the success that he's been able to have over the past few weeks. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be Dontavian Wicks, rostered in just under 5% of leagues, and it looked like this was going to be a great spot for Wicks here in week 16. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed were both out. He caught 2 passes for 29 yards and a touchdown, but unfortunately left with a chest injury before halftime. So we didn't get to see a full game of him, kind of operating as a top 2 wide receiver. Now, there's no guarantee this lines up where he's healthy and Watson and Reed continue to miss time, because I'd still view Dobbs as the better option over Wicks. But there is a chance, I guess, where those two continue to miss time, Wicks gets healthy, and then he could be like a wide receiver 3 flex option heading into week 17. After Wicks, we're going to have KJ Osborne, who's rostered in 22.5% of leagues, and he kind of went from being like the 4th target, the 3rd wide receiver, to potentially being the number 2 target heading into week 17. Both Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson left with injuries. Osborne caught 5 of his 7 targets for 95 receiving yards and a touchdown. He has a nice matchup next week against the Packers. Like I said, he could be their number 2 target. So I think he's definitely in an interesting spot heading into week 17 and is someone who could be a spot start in your lineups. Then we're going to go with Demario Douglas, rostered in 29.3% of leagues. He had a solid game last night, targeted 8 times, caught 5 of them for 74 yards. He's put up double-digit PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games. And the one he wasn't able to do that in was week 15, where he was coming off of missing 2 straight games. He's also done that without scoring any touchdowns, so it's not like he's been super touchdown dependent. He's seeing the volume, he's getting the yardage. If he can add some touchdowns, he could be an interesting option this week. And then the final wide receiver here is going to be Zay Jones. He's rostered in 28.6% of leagues. He did miss the Week 16 game, Missed a few practices early on in the week, but he did log a limited participation later on in the week, so it seemed like he had a shot to play. In his last 3 games that he has been healthy and playing in, he was targeted 8, 14, and 8 times, so he has been able to command some solid volume. We did see T-Law leave Sunday's game with a shoulder injury. Hopefully he's healthy heading into week 17, because I really would only consider playing Zay Jones if T-Law was healthy. So could be worth a pickup. I do think he's like flex worthy if him and T-Law are both healthy here heading into this week. Now looking at the quarterback position, I think there's one clear top option. It's got to be Joe Flacco, rostered in 12.7% of leagues. It seems like his roster percentage really hasn't risen a ton, and I just imagine this because there's less teams locked in, still being competitive, and the top teams probably already have strong quarterbacks. But for Joe Flacco, he should be the clear top waiver quarterback. 16 or more points in all 4 of his starts. He has thrown for at least 300 passing yards in his last 3 games. Just been playing at a pretty high level. He's going out there slinging it. I mean, him and Amari Cooper just had a monster game together in week 16. So he would be my top waiver option at the quarterback position. Another guy who I'm just going to give a shout to, maybe the waiver wires picked through. Maybe you had Trevor Lawrence who could miss some time. Derek Carr, rostered in 22.4% of leagues. As a whole, it's been a pretty rough season for Derek Carr. He's been banged up, hasn't been producing at a very high level. Seems like the Saints fans have kind of been giving him a hard time, but he has been solid over the past 2 weeks. He scored 20 plus fantasy points and has thrown for 3 touchdowns in both of the last 2 games. He is going up against the Bucs defense in week 17, which had a nice bounce back against the Jags in week 16, but the secondary had its struggles in prior weeks, so I definitely don't think it's like a terrible matchup for Derek Carr if you are desperate. Now looking at the tight end position, I can't say I'm overly confident in any of these options, but some guys that could be streamable. The first guy who I probably have the most confidence in would be Tucker Kraft, rostered in 7.8% of leagues. He's just had very consistent production over the past 3 weeks, stepping in for the Luke Musgrave role, who went on IR. He has put up double-digit PPR points and has gone for 55-plus receiving yards in all 3 of his past games. So I like Tucker Kraft here as probably the top pickup. Then we have Logan Thomas, who just made the cut, rostered in 38.5% of leagues. I definitely think he's a more appealing option if the Commanders continue to stick with Brissett. I believe it's the second game in a row where he's had to come in for Sam Howell and has just come in and provided an instant spark. So I'd honestly be kind of surprised if they go back to Sam Howell just with benching him in back-to-back weeks. But this was the first solid game that Logan Thomas has had in a while. Targeted 6 times, caught 5 of those for 36 yards and a touchdown. The next tight end is going to be Gerald Everett, rostered in 25.9% of leagues. He's been targeted 8 times in 3 straight games. He has 8 or more PPR points in 5 straight. It's tough to see him having much of a ceiling just being on the Chargers offense. And I still think the floor is somewhat low, but I mean, you got to give it to him. He's been fairly consistent over like these last 5 games. And then the final tight end that I think is, could be worth picking up is Chigo Okonkwo, rostered in 31% of leagues. He's coming off his best fantasy game of the season, 6 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown. This was actually the first time that Chig broke double-digit PPR points, which, I mean, as a whole is just not great. However, he has been pretty consistent as of late. He scored 8 or more PPR points in 4 of his last 5, so he hasn't had much of a ceiling, but he had been somewhat consistent, over the last stretch of the season. And then pivoting into the final position, going to be the defenses. Definitely some solid streaming options out there. Going to start it off with the Broncos, rostered in 36.8% of leagues. Didn't put together a crazy game against the Patriots, but they were fine. Didn't kill you in your lineup. They get another really nice matchup going up against the Chargers, who did hang tough with the Bills, but I'm just not super convinced with that offense. Then we have the Jaguars, rostered in 33.3% of leagues, going up against the Panthers. Jaguars defense hasn't been overly impressive. Panthers offense did have a pretty nice game against the Packers, but we have a very long sample size of this Panthers offense struggling, so I do think that's a solid play. We have the Rams, rostered in 27.8% of leagues. They're going up against the Giants. Also like that matchup. Seahawks, rostered in 19% of leagues. I know we saw the big explosion out of the Steelers offense, but I'm definitely not sold on them long term. I think they're a nice matchup here for the Seahawks. And then the final team, going to be the Bears, rostered in 21.7% of leagues. Didn't have a great fantasy day against the Cardinals, but they really didn't give up a ton of points. It was just the lack of turnovers and sacks there. They're going up against the Falcons, which has been a pretty up and down offense. So could be a team you go out and pick up and stream. But that's going to wrap it up for my top waiver wire targets at every single position. Hopefully you guys are able to go out, bring that championship home. Hopefully you can pick up, one of these players who could just give you some depth, some security if you have injuries, and really just help you lock down that fantasy football title. So best of luck to all of you guys. Hopefully you tune in to the rest of the videos throughout the week. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.